Marigold Hanson had never thought she'd find one of the biggest scandals in Wisteria Waters hidden under a dusty stack of old newspapers. She had come to the quaint riverside town to write a short travel piece on its charming bed and breakfasts and its iconic wisteria-laden paths. As a freelance writer, she prided herself on thorough research. She loved burrowing into town archives, rummaging through boxes of clippings and interviewing people who had fascinating anecdotes that never made it into guidebooks. But Wisteria Waters quietly offered much more than she'd anticipated. On her third day in town, she was sitting in the municipal archives, run by the Historical Society, when she stumbled upon a ledger so old its edges were fraying, its ink yellowing, and its spine brittle from neglect. The ledger's presence in a box labelled Town Taxes, 1974, was incongruous enough to pique her curiosity. She flipped through it, expecting mundane lists of receipts or property values. Instead, she discovered pages scrawled in a shaky hand, filled with lines of codes. The codes were made up of letters, numbers, and odd little symbols, none of which made immediate sense. At the bottom of many pages, a single name or partial name occasionally appeared, along with a date. Intrigued, Marigold photographed several pages on her phone, determined to investigate further. Later that evening, she sat in her temporary lodging, a snug guest room in the home of Mrs. Florence Tisdale, a long-retired school librarian. Marigold laid out the photographic prints of the ledger pages across a small desk and studied them. 3 columns lined each page. The first contained what looked like a date, though the years matched those from almost 5 decades ago. The second column was filled with gibberish, a series of alphanumeric codes that seemed to follow a pattern, but weren't immediately decipherable. The third column sometimes listed a short phrase like overdue or received, but the penmanship was too erratic for her to be certain. The final row on each page bore a signature, or partial name, S. Wilk, Anne, as though the writer had started signing but changed their mind. In search of clarity, Marigold sought out Florence's expertise. If she was lodging under the same roof as a former librarian, it couldn't hurt to show her the ledger pages. After supper, Marigold approached Florence's living room. The older woman was crocheting by a lamp, her wiry grey hair in a loose bun. A cat dozed loyally at her feet. Florence had eagerly welcomed Marigold's request for a chat about local history. "Florence," Marigold began gently, "I came across something strange in the municipal archives today. It's a ledger, but it's written in code. Would you mind having a look? You might recognize something about it that I don't." Florence raised an eyebrow behind her round glasses. "A coded ledger? Well, that's something you don't find every day." She set aside her crocheting. "Bring it here, let me see if it rings any bells." Marigold pulled out her phone and scrolled to the clearest photograph, enlarging it so Florence could read. The older woman studied it intently for several minutes, occasionally pressing the screen to zoom in. Hard to say for certain, but it looks like a substitution code, a pattern of numbers and letters that likely represent words or amounts of money, Florence concluded. "I've seen something similar in old diaries or love notes, but this one seems more formal. Are you certain it was in a box for taxes from 1974? "That's what's so odd," Marigold replied, settling into an armchair. "It doesn't match the rest of the documents. And there's no official reference, no yearbook or tax assessment that clarifies it. I'm guessing it was shoved there by mistake or intentionally hidden." Florence's eyes glimmered with curiosity. "Well, days were different back then. Some secrets were kept out of fear or necessity. If you're up for a challenge, dear, you might try to decode it. Don't be surprised if you stir up old skeletons in the process." The next morning, Marigold headed to Wisteria Waters' small public library, only a few blocks from the archives. She hoped that cross-referencing the partial names or the coded entries against microphone records might reveal something. The library was housed in a converted Victorian cottage, with a wrap-around porch bursting with floral baskets. True to the town's famously blooming aesthetic, Inside, she set up a microfilm reader, methodically combing through the local newspaper archives for the mid-1000. 970s. She jotted down whatever seemed interesting, references to scandal or large sums of money, as well as obituaries that mentioned any S. Wilk or Annan, or anything of the sort. Hours later, the bright morning sunshine had faded into the grey hush of early evening. She had just unloaded another reel of microfilm when the library door chimed. In walked a friend she'd made earlier in the week, Charlotte Kimball, a local genealogist. Charlotte greeted her with a bright smile. "Fancy seeing you here," said Charlotte, setting down a bag of groceries. "Edna at the grocery store told me you were in the library all day, and I had something to drop off. Mind if I join you?" Marigold grinned and motioned to the next chair. "Be my guest. I could use a second pair of eyes. I found a coded ledger in the archives." She quickly updated Charlotte on the cryptic discovery. Charlotte's eyes lit up. "Let me see these codes. I love puzzles more than I love genealogies, and that's saying something." Marigold handed over a printout. Charlotte ran her fingertip along the symbols carefully. "If this is for blackmail or hidden transactions, it might correspond to actual money amounts or shortened names. For instance, S. Wilk could be S. Wilkins or S. Wilkinson. Let me do some cross-referencing in genealogical records. I have a local family database that might match partial names." They spent the next hour working side by side. Charlotte tapped steadily at her laptop, occasionally cross-checking the local genealogical records with the partial signatures from the Meanwhile, Marigold perused old newspapers for any mention of hush money, missing funds, or people paying someone in secret. At last, Charlotte gave a little gasp. "I found a partial match. There was a Silas Wilkinson living in Wisteria Waters in the 1970s. He died unexpectedly in 1975, though the obituary was very brief." "Unexpectedly?" Marigold repeated, sensing a clue. "No details at all? That's unusual for a small-town obit." Charlotte shook her head. "No details, just that he died in a neighbouring county. But what's more intriguing is that he was a bookkeeper for the local feed store and also served on the town council. Could he have authored this ledger or been involved in its transactions?" Marigold felt a prickle of excitement. "Absolutely could. Bookkeepers know how to keep records, and if he had council knowledge, maybe he'd discovered something or was orchestrating a blackmail. Let's see what the other partial names might match." They continued their work until the library's closing time forced them to leave. Still thirsting for answers, Marigold and Charlotte decided to visit the feed store in question, now owned by Jasper Hughes, an affable man in his early 60s. If anyone knew anything about past employees, it might be the current owner. They found Jasper stacking shelves with birdseed behind the vintage checkout counter. An ancient, placid hound dozed near his feet. He greeted the women warmly, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "What brings you ladies here this late in the day?" Marigold introduced herself as a freelance writer, explaining her interest in town history. "We were curious about a past employee, Silas Wilkinson. He worked here in the 1970s. Do you happen to know anything about him?" Jasper's eyes flickered with recognition. "Silas Wilkinson. Now there's a name I haven't heard in decades. He was a bookkeeper here before my father took over the store. I was just a teenager at the time, but I recall the older folks whispering about some scandal around him. Nothing was ever concrete, but rumors circulated that he knew too many secrets." Charlotte exchanged a look of excitement with Marigold. "Could it have been blackmail?" Jasper shrugged, a somber note creeping into his voice. "Possibly. Folks said Silas had a ledger with all sorts of hush-hush information, but it was never found. Then, unexpectedly, he died. Some said under suspicious circumstances. Others said it was a heart attack. My father always said the man was troubled, but he never gave details." Jasper rubbed at his chin. "I can tell you, though, that around that time, a few high-profile residents suddenly left town. or withdrew from public life. Marigold jotted down notes feverishly. Do you recall any particular residence? Or what might have triggered Silas's rumored blackmail? Jasper thought a moment. Mayor Burton back then, Cecil Burton, stepped down abruptly with no explanation. Then there was Maureen Darcy, who ran the ladies' auxiliary. She suddenly sold her home and vanished. Maybe Silas had dirt on them. Charlotte glanced at Marigold, eyes glowing with curiosity. We should talk to anyone still around who might have known Silas or these other figures. There may be a living witness who can help us. Thanking Jasper for his time, the duo left. Night had fallen, the streetlights revealing a gentle hush over Wisteria Waters. Marigold asked Charlotte if she knew any long-time residents who might give further context. We need a direct connection to Silas. Interviews might help us decode the ledger references to see how they tie to actual black. Charlotte tapped her chin. There is one person, Miss Harriet Bloomfield, well into her 80s. She's resided here her whole life and was once Mr. Burton's secretary back in the day. If anyone would know about hush-hush dealings in the mayor's office, it's Harriet. She lives in the old Victorian on Maple Lane. They arranged a visit with Harriet the following afternoon, calling ahead to see if she'd be open to chatting about historical matters. Harriet agreed, her voice crackling with age but also with an undercurrent of curiosity. The next day, Marigold and Charlotte returned to Maple Lane, a shady thoroughfare lined with oak trees and front porches typical of a cosy southern town. Harriet's Victorian home was beautifully maintained, with neat hedges and freshly painted shutters. An air of polite grace lingered in every detail. A caretaker let them in and guided them to a sunroom where Harriet sat in a high-backed armchair, a crocheted blanket over her legs. Though frail, she seemed sharp-eyed and immediately focused on her visitors. She offered them tea, and once pleasantries were exchanged, Charlotte gently introduced the subject of Silas Wilkinson. Harriet's spoon rattled against her teacup. Silas. Well, goodness, that is a name I did not expect to hear again. She paused, collecting her thoughts. Yes, I was Mr. Burton's secretary at the time, and Silas was on the town council, as well as some committees. He was enthusiastic about local governance. Yet, he had a way of prying into people's affairs. Rumors swirled about him. Some people said he kept a book of secrets. Her wrinkled lips tightened. I always thought he was a harmless busybody, until Mr. Burton abruptly stepped down. Then the rumor mill turned malicious. Marigold leaned forward, carefully setting her cup on a saucer. So you never saw the ledger yourself? Was there talk it might contain blackmail material? Harriet nodded. Yes, I recall whispers that Silas had discovered improprieties in the mayor's office, a small misuse of funds or questionable dealings with local businesses, enough to ruin reputations if it became public. He confronted people privately. Whether he demanded money or political favors, I can't say for sure. The next thing we knew, hush money was presumably exchanged, and a few prominent citizens vanished from the scene. And soon after, Silas died. Charlotte gently asked, Did you ever suspect foul play in his death? Harriet sighed. There were rumors, but the official story was that Silas had a fatal heart attack while out of town. Some folks believed he was silenced. I don't have proof, but yes, I always wondered. Marigold pulled out a print of the coded ledger pages. Do any of these phrases or partial names look familiar? We have possible references to S. Wilk and a second partial name that begins with Ain. Could that be Andrew, Angela, or Anna? Harriet's brow furrowed. Mr. Burton's given name was Cecil, so it's not him. But the phrase Anne might point to Andrew R. Caldwell, who was a local attorney at the time. He too left town under shady circumstances. It's possible. All I know is, if you decode that ledger, you'll solve a big puzzle that's weighed on Wisteria Waters for decades. After heartfelt thanks, Marigold and Charlotte took their leave. With their new leads, they retreated to Charlotte's office, a small space above the local bakery, to attempt cracking the ledger's code with more refined techniques. Charlotte introduced Marigold to a basic substitution cipher solver on her computer. After scanning the pages and inputting possible partial matches, they tried a few guesses tied to local names, amounts of money, or potential blackmail descriptors. Progress was slow, with many false starts, but around midnight they struck gold. The solver recognized a likely system. Each letter corresponded to a number a certain distance down the alphabet, but the letters were scrambled at intervals. Column 2 contained references to cash amounts disguised by letters. R stands for $5.00. B stands for $10.00. Charlotte muttered, flipping between screens. But it changes with each row. This is advanced for small-town blackmail. Silas must have been quite cunning. Eventually, they decoded a partial entry. Date, March 18th, 74. Payment, $200.00 from CB. Mayor Burton. Hush re, shady building contract. Marigold inhaled sharply. It's blackmail, all right. This is proof that the mayor paid Silas $200.00 to keep quiet about an illegal building contract. The next row read, date, March 22nd, 74. Payment, $150.00 from MD. Maureen Darcy. Hush re. False charity accounts. The ledger's revelations came thick and fast. Plaintiffs of Silas's blackmail extended to powerful town figures, indicating that hush money changed hands repeatedly. The partial name, Ian Caldwell, appeared with a note referencing compromising letters, tying it to Andrew Caldwell, the attorney Harriet had mentioned. By the early morning light, Marigold and Charlotte had unraveled enough to piece together the timeline. In early 1974, Silas had discovered multiple local misdeeds. He systematically confronted each offender, demanded cash for silence, and documented every transaction in code. Then, by 1975, Silas died under nebulous circumstances, leaving the ledger hidden, likely in fear or potentially to preserve blackmail material for future leverage. They printed copies of the decoded entries, the once jumbled pages now reading like a grim litany of small-town corruption. This is going to rock Wisteria Waters' foundation if it goes public, Charlotte said quietly. Though many of the people involved are gone, the implications might still matter, especially for their family. We should confirm how he died. If it was truly suspicious, the town might have a decades-old unsolved case on its hands. But we have to tread carefully. We can't accuse anyone without solid proof. She hesitated before adding, I think we should speak to the local authorities, or at least the Historical Society. This ledger belongs to the archives, after all, and we've deciphered something big. Charlotte suggested they visit Sheriff Grayson Winters, a fair-minded man well respected in the community. Though a few decades had passed, he could at least advise them on how to handle the revelations from the ledger. They made an appointment for mid-morning at the sheriff's office, a tidy brick building near the center of town. Sheriff Winters welcomed them into his office with a kind but cautious expression. Once they explained their mission and placed the decoded ledger on his desk, his eyebrows shot upward in surprise. Marigold noticed he read with meticulous care, scanning the columns, occasionally pausing to look up and ask clarifying questions. This is quite the discovery, he remarked, after turning the final page. I've been in Wisteria Waters my whole life and heard hush-hush rumors about Silas Wilkinson. But to see the evidence is surreal. Mary Burton, Maureen Darcy, Andrew Caldwell, it's all here. You realize this proves criminal extortion on Silas's part as well as corruption by these townspeople? Charlotte nodded. Yes, we had the same thought. Is there anything else we can do to figure out if Silas's death was truly suspicious? Sheriff Winters pursed his lips. I can check old case files. Officially, Silas's death was reported as a heart attack in Hudson County, a few hours away. If there was foul play, it likely never made it into local records. But knowledge that Silas was blackmailing people might open new lines of inquiry. Mind you, it's a cold case now, and many of the potential suspects have died or left. Still, you've provided enough reason to take a fresh look. Feeling relieved, Marigold entrusted the original ledger to Sheriff Winter's safekeeping. She and Charlotte departed, uncertain how the revelations might disrupt the town they'd grown to love for its gentle facade. Word travelled swiftly in a small community, however, and soon quiet whispers circulated that some old Blackmail files had turned up in the archives. Within days, locals began speculating about secrets from the 1970s that might see the light of day. Determined to finish her freelance piece on Wisteria Waters, Marigold turned in her milder article on the town's scenic charms. But she couldn't ignore the bigger story slowly unfolding behind the scenes. She penned a second piece, carefully omitting names to preserve privacy, noting only the broader significance of unveiling a decades-old coded ledger that demonstrated how secrets could shape a community. Curious souls approached her in the grocery store and at the bakery, asking if the rumor was true. She offered guarded responses, explaining only that she had discovered a historically significant document and turned it over to the sheriff's office. Then, one morning, she received a surprise. An envelope slipped under her door at Mrs. Tisdale's home. Inside was a small slip of paper bearing a typed message. "Leave well enough alone. Some secrets are better left buried." A chill ran down Marigold's spine. She hurried to Charlotte's flat, the note clutched in her hand. Charlotte read it with wide eyes. "This is a threat. Someone doesn't want the truth about Silas's ledger to see the light of day. After all these years?" Marigold wondered aloud. "Are they worried about damaged legacies or some hidden beneficiary the Blackmail might still implicate?" Charlotte nodded grimly. "Possibly, or perhaps someone fears new scrutiny of Silas's death might reveal a killer. We should tell Sheriff Winters about this. He's the best chance we have at ensuring our safety." Before they had the chance, a knock on Charlotte's office door startled them. Sheriff Winters entered, polishing his glasses with a handkerchief. The lines on his face were graver than usual. "I'm glad I found you two. I have some updates. We cross-referenced Silas's death certificate with statements from those final days. It seems under circumstances overshadowed by rumored blackmail, there are enough unanswered questions to suspect he might have been murdered. His heart attack may have been induced or fabricated, and this ledger stands as a powerful motive." Marigold handed the sheriff the threatening note. His expression soured as he read it. "I see. Whoever wants this matter buried is getting desperate. Let me be clear. You're not in trouble, and we won't let anyone harm you. I'll assign my deputy to keep a watch around your lodgings. However, I do think it wise to lay low for a while. If you dig too deeply, the culprit or their associates might get bolder." Though unsettled, Marigold felt a surge of determination. "I don't plan to chase the murderer myself, Sheriff. But if the ledger can finally bring truth and closure, I'm not going to hide from it either." The sheriff nodded with respect and left them to consider their next steps. Charlotte and Marigold spent time ensuring that they had duplicates of all their findings stored securely. They waited for the sheriff's investigation to proceed. Over the ensuing weeks, the local authorities, bolstered by the new evidence, quietly reopened the decades-old case of Silas Wilkinson's death. They interviewed any surviving relatives and old acquaintances. Harriet Bloomfield provided an official statement of her recollections. Gradually, names emerged of possible suspects, to the extent that they were still alive or connected to that era. For reasons unknown, the authorities homed in on a reclusive figure named Arnold Whitefield, an assistant to Andrew Caldwell. Arnold had remained in town, living modestly on the outskirts. He had seemingly had a falling out with Caldwell just before Caldwell disappeared. Whisperings suggested Arnold had once been the go-between for hush money. Though official details remained confidential, rumor had it that after enough prodding, Arnold finally confessed. A local newspaper quietly reported that the cold case had reached a resolution. Silas Wilkinson had indeed been poisoned. Arnold, allegedly on Caldwell's orders, delivered a glass of tainted whiskey the night Silas was supposed to collect yet another hush payment. Arnold had lived with the guilt in silence for decades, believing Caldwell had fled to avoid the law. Eventually, Arnold had no choice but to speak up once the ledger reappeared. Charges were complicated by his advanced age and the fact that Caldwell was deceased, with no further legal recourse. But the truth was out. Wisteria Waters' secret blackmail scheme, culminating in murder, was no longer hidden beneath the dusty archives. News spread quickly through the close-knit community, and a sense of solemn relief mingled with the typical bustle of everyday life. Residents felt shaken that such crimes had been buried in their charming little town. Yet, they were also proud that the truth had finally been uncovered. Some recognized that the best path forward lay in acknowledging the past while continuing to cultivate the warmth and hospitality for which Wisteria Waters was known. For her part, Marigold found herself in the unexpected role of catalyst, for she and Charlotte, with their curiosity and research skills, had brought old truths to light. As she prepared to leave the riverside town, her official projects complete, she felt a swirl of emotions. Over breakfast on her last day, Florence Tisdale devoured the local paper's account of the confession with hushed amazement. Imagine that! All these years, people probably crossed paths with that man, clueless he was part of a homicide cover-up, she mused, shaking her head. "I'll miss this place," Marigold said, standing near the front door with her suitcase. "And I'll miss you. This town became more than just a travel article for me. I'm leaving with a story of a lifetime. I hope people can forgive and move forward." Florence smiled, her kind eyes shining. "Wisteria Waters has a big heart. We'll heal, and we'll be grateful for the closure you helped bring. Come back any time, dear. We'll have a guest room waiting, preferably for a less dramatic visit." Marigold laughed softly. Stepping outside, she gazed down the lane, the air perfumed with the town's beloved flowering vines. The old secrets had been swept from the darkness of the archives into the sunlight, bringing resolution to a ghost that had haunted Wisteria Waters for decades. She felt oddly at peace, a sense of accomplishment tinged with compassion for a town that, despite its gentle charms, had not escaped the unfortunate stains of human failings. After saying her final goodbyes, Marigold climbed into her car. The road out of town looked picturesque, lined with blossoming wisteria draping over fences like purple curtains. As she drove off, she couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror at the place that, for a time, had been her home, and her greatest mystery. She left behind a piece of her heart, knowing Wisteria Waters would go on, blooming in the gentle warmth of the sun, forever changed by the ledger's secrets, yet liberated by the truth they had finally uncovered.